So welcome everyone to this edition of ROV Meditation Practice Tips. And today we're going to dive into this meditation controversy over gamma brainwaves and more activated states in the brain. And it's interesting, we're reading Andrew Newberg's book, How Enlightenment Changes the Brain. And then one of our students posted online today one of her graphs that reflects exactly what we're talking about. So it's nice to see, Stephen, that it's not just you and me that are having these results with our headbands. I have my old reliable Muse 1 headband on, and it's still ticking. In fact, I have it going right now, and looks like, yeah, we have a nice alpha over theta state going here. So I want to begin by reading from Andrew Newberg's book and some things that really support what Stephen and I are talking about and sharing in subtle energy meditation in terms of shifting states and the importance of being able to shift states from high activation states to real low activation states in the brain and the effect that that has in meditation. So just a few paragraphs from How Enlightenment Changes the Brain. So our research suggests that the more quickly you alter brain functioning by rapidly increasing and then decreasing neural activity, particularly in the frontal and parietal lobes, the more likely you are to interrupt old beliefs that could hold you back from experiencing life in a totally different way. What we're beginning to see in these more unusual spiritual practices, so Stephen, I guess we're doing unusual spiritual practices in subtle energy meditation, is initially heightened activity throughout the brain, followed by a sudden drop in which you often feel an incredible rush of energy and intensity. You've broken the sound barrier of everyday consciousness by moving into a new state of awareness. And so then he goes and talks about how certain exercises help provide an initial increase of activity in your brain, especially in the frontal and parietal regions. This helps prime the brain to experience different states of consciousness by eventually enabling a greater drop in activity in these areas, what we believe are associated with enlightenment experiences. By shutting down frontal lobe activity after increasing frontal lobe activity, your habits and belief system can be temporarily suspended. So you're suspending the default mode network, the habitual way of thinking and feeling and focusing on self, and lowering activity in the parietal lobe. Your ordinary sense of self can disappear from consciousness. In that moment, many people experience extraordinary insights that bring feelings of clarity, euphoria, and insights into the nature of themselves, the world, and the universe. So, shifting states, increasing activity in the brain helps and facilitates and enables a downshifting of activity in the brain. And this then opens up a whole new way of perceiving ourselves, others, and the world. And that's really what it's all about, right? That's the ultimate shift we're looking about, is this shift in consciousness where we experience ourselves as part of this one life that we all share. And there's a radically different way of being that comes out of that shift in perception, where we have a natural sense of deep inner peace, a natural sense of compassion as we relate to ourselves and others. So re-looking at some, at Muse graphs in particular, and I did I'm gonna share my screen and show you just a couple graphs here. So here is a graph of raw data. And initially, these graphs in Muse were used as proof, so to speak, that the readings we were getting in Muse were faulty, okay? Because look at this wide band of raw data there. So this practice here, the beginning of this practice in, let's see, 622 to 632 is kind of a preparation of calm breathing in the lower dantian, lower abdomen. And then the next practice is the torus breathing, where we're breathing up through the central channel and really resting in a high energy state that is where the brain feels like it's turned on, like an electrical circuit, and there's a real charge in the brain. And you see that that creates this wide band of raw activity. So rather than talking about, well, you know, if that means this is accurate or not, look at the effect of that afterwards. So when you drop out of that here at 646 in the graph and just rest in a deep, still, silent state, you can see how that state has been facilitated by what happened in this high energy state. So after this high energy state, there was a deep drop into a quiet, still mind. And that's what Andrew Newberg is talking about there, is by using these high energizing or high activating practices and then dropping out of them into a deep peace and stillness, the brain is really affected by that. And the deep stillness is facilitated by that high energy state. Then I want to show you another graph that shows, so in this previous graph, what I was doing in this meditation was resting in stillness and then instantly dissolving any experience that arises. Like the stillness just didn't allow any phenomenal experience to arise. So an instantly dissolving state. And then in this one, now the range is different on this one. So whereas the range on this graph was 1400, so the lines look a little flatter than in this graph, which looks a little wider, but really it's just an effect of the range, the scale. So here, same kind of practice. There's in the beginning here, about 809 to 817 or so, there's a calm lower dantian breathing. And then there's this energy raising practice from about 817 to 827, so about 10 minutes there. And then there's this dropping out into this real deep stillness. But in this case, rather than just muting or dampening or dissolving any experience that arises, there's just a resting in the stillness and allowing the whole field of awareness to arise. And as there's a sense of the whole field of awareness arising, there's again this expansion of the energy, so that as in this meditation, after the stillness, I just tuned into the whole field and allowed that sense of the whole field of awareness to just naturally be present without doing anything, just tuning into that whole field. And you can see again, just a natural activation. It's like there's energy in the whole field as you tune into that field. And that's what it feels like in the practice, right, Stephen? Is that like this raw graph, whatever you might think about it, represents exactly how the practice feels, right? So it feels just completely quiet and still here. And then in the end, it feels like all of life is just opened up and is vibrant and alive and one space, a vast, infinite life force. And so anyway, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to pass over to you, Stephen. And you have a very similar graph, which shows the same kind of thing and also compares a study by Lutz in 2004 that talks about this activation of the brain.
Thank you, Kevin. And yes, like you, the felt sense is exactly what the graphs show. That's always what we were so present to, that what we felt and what the graphs show were exactly the same thing. And when we've gone to different labs and as you know, I've had different tests done in Japan. You've had different tests done in the States. That the labs showed. So if we go away from brainwaves and just talk about energy or activation. So I love the way our good friend Kiefer O'Sullivan, and neuroscientist, has pointed out to us that perhaps activation was a better word to use, so that's how I'm going to talk about this now. Unlike you, I'm wearing Flowtime, so Flowtime will be pleased. They're also a company that can measure. So their headsets also, like Muse, can measure the brain waves and measure heart coherence and so on. So we tried this out on both Muse and on Flowtime, and again exactly the same results. And then when we went to labs, so you went to labs and you went to a doctor in the US, and I went to Dentsu Labs, so with researcher Shinsuke Aoki in the whole Dentsu Labs, and they looked at the same thing and they asked me to produce results similar to what you're talking about: raising energy, going into a space of deep stillness, raising energy, going into a non-dual compassionate awareness. So simply showing that over very short bursts of time. And exactly the same thing happened in the Dentsu results. They showed this high activation. So again, and then this deactivation and into this spacious awareness or this real non-dual compassionate awareness. So I was quite intrigued by this because, especially after talking to Kiefer, both you and I were aware that no matter which way you talk about it, so we're almost veering away from saying these are gamma brainwaves, as Lutz did in his earlier research, and that is to say these are high energy activations of whatever form you want to describe them. They definitely show a shift in energy. So, and interestingly, in Andrew Newberg's study, as he said, he speaks about particular high energy exercises to raise your vibration, to raise your energy. And he particularly refers to things like high energy chanting, Sufi dancing. And when I first got Muse, I did exactly those, because I was well aware that doing Kriya was a high energy activation. And I went outside and I did lots of practices. I did Tibetan sky gazing practices, and they gave a very high energy activation. Then I did dancing, of course. I did singing, I did chanting out in temples, and all of them, it just as Andrew Newberg's research has pointed out, gives you a very high activation. In terms of energy, it does activate the energy. And then when you go into this space of stillness, there is a deactivation, and you can actually feel that in the high energy activation states feel like your whole brain is lit up. And then when you deactivate, you feel a whole different felt sense, almost as if there is simply vast space. And then, as you've pointed out in your graphs, Kevin, if you actually allow that vast space to be vivid and clear and bright and clear, it reactivates. You can reactivate quite spontaneously. So the graphs, when Kiefer looked at this quite some time ago, he pointed out quite accurately that that my graphs at that stage bore quite considerable resemblance to Lutz's research in 2004. So again, we're not talking about brainwaves in terms of delta, gamma, or even though Lutz's report does make reference to gamma, we're talking about an activation of energy in terms of microvolts. So you can see that in Lutz's research, they did exactly the same thing as what Kevin's graph showed and my graph showed. So in this beginning part here, they're simply in a very deep resting state, simple relaxation. And there's this incredible power of being able to relax into your natural, effortless state and allow that to arise. So in essence, that's what these advanced groups, so these were advanced meditators with considerable, so many years of experience, both in Lutz's report. And in Kevin, my graphs, they show the same tendency at the beginning, this very simple, relax into effortless, relax, really deep presence. And then at the first section of it, just like Lutz's meditators, and just be aware that the vertical scale is the same and the horizontal scale is different. Mine is done over, this whole meditation is over 60 minutes. And Lutz's, this time reference is actually only 100 seconds. So from 150 seconds to be precise. This first section is 50 seconds. And the second section is around 100 seconds. So just be aware the horizontal scale is a little bit different. So even though Lutz's measurement looks drawn out, it's actually only taken over that many seconds, whereas this is over some minutes in my graph. And you can see that the activation is very much the same. It's around 20 microvolts. And that was something that Kiefer pointed out to me back then. And I thought it was a really good pointing out, because it's just speaking simply to energy activation, to the fact that there is microvolts of energy activated and raised. So when Kevin and I looked at this, and then we looked at Kevin's raw energy data in Muse, and we looked at flow time, we saw all the same results. Didn't matter whether we looked at Lutz's results or Muse or flow time or our lab reports or my Dentsu experiments. If we just focus on the simple word activation, then we can really simply say that entering into a space of deep rest and relaxation and surrendering to first this high energy activation through whatever means or technique you did it. So in mine, there are 3 different techniques actually, or rather there are 2, and the third one is not. The first burst of activation energy is actually Kriya. The second burst is devotion to Divine Mother, simply opening to that devotional space and that real deep joy and love and devotion of presence. And the third one is, like Kevin's, is just a spontaneous upliftment into the field. And then again, resting down. Now, part of the reason there was, in some senses, parts of this is quite deliberate, because I was doing a test in this case, and I passed the results to Kiefer for analysis. And Kiefer pointed out about the activation, the 20 microvolts amplitude, and the comparison to Lutz. Again, not speaking about gamma, but speaking about activation. So I thought that as of both what Kevin and I have been saying for quite some time, that the activation is what is really crucial, and that's the activation in this, especially in the prefrontal cortex, and that after the activation, just as Andrew Newberg's study points out, or many years of research pointed out, that after the activation, there is then the brain is able to drop out, and you can see that in this final section of it, for example, where the brain can literally drop into these non-referential states. There's no self, there's just simply a resting there. And there are the shifts are what enables that. I think that's what Andrew's research really speaks about, is this shift into this decrease of energy. So, I mean, you can see there is obviously decreases of energy at different points in the research and in the data, which is exactly what he points to. There's decrease in the prefrontal cortex, and there's decrease in the parietal lobes. So we were very aware Also, when we did the research, it didn't matter whether we were looking at the, the frontal sections of, for example, Muse data, so the frontal lobes or the temporal lobes, whatever was occurring for us was occurring right across the brain. So there was, and that's something that Lutz did talk about, was the synchrony in the brain that occurred, that coherence. So for us, that coherence occurred very naturally. And so I really, for those of you that are watching, I really encourage you to experiment in shifting. I think Lutz's study, regardless of whether he's speaking about gamma or not, he speaks about the ability of long-term meditators to shift states, to be able to go from one state to another. Now, in all the tests that I've done, especially in the labs, I've consistently been asked to, show 60-second, so to activate for 60 seconds, rest for 60 seconds, drop out completely for 60 seconds, back to, so it's kind of that ability to shift flexibly and easily and quite naturally is a really useful skill for a meditator, because it opens you to being natural and effortless no matter what life throws at you. So if you're in obstacles or challenges or struggles, that you can shift into being aware of awareness while things are quite difficult, that equally you can be aware of awareness when things are good. So when things are even and balanced, there's also that same natural, effortless flow and surrender into your practice. And then there's no real meditation or post-meditation, right? There's just this simple ability to be the awareness of awareness throughout your day, 24/7. And whether
right. And sometimes high focus is called for, right? You want to be able to train that, because you want to be able to focus on task and stay on task and be completely absorbed in that. And sometimes letting go in this wider space of awareness, this letting go, this holding a space for self and others to be as they are, that's appropriate. And so all these different, in subtle energy meditation, we're training all these different skills. We're training this intent focus, this ability to energize and brighten. And when you're energizing, it's like a natural antidepressant, right? It's just, your whole brain, your whole body, your whole being lights up and is alive. And that's an important, that really transforms life, when you have the ability to, at will, just find that bright, open clarity and feel energized and alive. And then there's times when you want to be able to let go of all the activity and rest into a deep stillness and a real letting go activity. So I liken the subtle energy, the shifting of states in subtle energy meditation to a workout. You have different aspects of a workout, right? You have aerobic training that gets your cardiovascular system going. You have strength training, which is really intense, high intensity, that builds muscle. You have stretching that expands your limits. And then after all that, you have this profound rest and relaxation and letting go that's facilitated by all the activities that you did previously. So this is like this style of meditation is like a workout for your inner system, right? To where you're training all your innate capacities in a progressive sequence in a way where one shift facilitates the next, and you end up with a fully flexible and integrated body, heart, mind system that is able, as you just said, to face whatever is happening in life and enjoy it and embrace it with equanimity and compassion.
Yeah, Kevin, I totally agree. I do love the way Mingyur Rinpoche puts it when in the retreats I've been on with him. He says, look, everything's okay. Just don't be a zombie, and don't forget. Because he said there is a kind of a tendency when people get into awakening practices, they think, oh, I'm just going to be like, nothing's going to ever affect me. And yet, as he points out, look, thoughts arise, feelings arise. the difference is that you're very aware. And just as you point out about the, the importance of these high energy activation practices, when you look at some of the ancient Tibetan traditions, for example, all their preliminary practices involve things like, Vajra stances, which you hold and generate enormous amounts of energy, and inner fire practices where you draw energy up the spine. And then they go into shamatha practices where it's very calm, abiding, and then vipassana practices where there's a deep space of inquiry, and then into nature of mind practices, which can include, ocean and waves, and being the lion's gaze, and into awareness of awareness. So there is a whole versatility of techniques and practices. I think when people, look at monks, they think, oh, well, they're just sitting there all day. But when you go on retreat with monks, you know that they are incredibly active and very, very real, very down to earth, very, humorous and funny people. And they have all their quirks and their practices that, Mingyur Rinpoche often used to say, look, if you're getting too heavy in your practice, do lots of aerobic exercises, get out there and move your body, because it's part of being able to sit for long periods of time. It's that you actually understand how to activate energy and you're able to shift. So I do like it, that we're aware of what's happening. We're simply relaxing into this natural, effortless space of awareness and being aware of the wonders of life as they flow through them, including all the parts that seem to struggle, and including all those parts that bring such joy. So yeah, I'm very present to how open and precious this human lifetime is as we venture further and further into it. And doing this with you, Kevin, is an absolute joy, along with wearing and investigating as we have over so many years, these wondrous little headsets.
It's a good look, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is funny. Well, we're both, I think both of us are aware that whenever we've shared about the brainwaves, there's brainwaves and, and energy and activated states, that there's a lot of interest out there in our community for, well, how do you best use that? How do you best activate it? And then what happens, and how can I, help life? I mean, ultimately, if it's not going to make a difference to your life and help you to feel more natural, calm, deeply understanding and compassionate, then you've got to ask why you're doing it. So
exactly. No, we're multi-dimensional beings, right? We have this body, heart, mind system that has all sorts of different capacities for concentration and clarity and compassion and expansion and deep letting go and rest and peace. And it's training that whole system and all those capacities in an integrated, progressive way that's the heart of this practice. And these headsets, when you look at the raw data graphs and you look at them from this perspective of shifting states, it's amazing how they show the shift in states, right? No matter what you want to call it, you can clearly see the shift in states that happens with these little home EEG devices. So
yeah. No, you're right, Kevin. I think, what you're talking about is speaking straight to our own individual song that we sing, or our own unique brain signature pattern. Really, really treasure your opportunity to explore this through these headsets. Treasure the opportunity not to compare, but simply to understand what your brain is telling you, what sort of signature, what melody does it play, and when you shift states, how does that change your brain? I mean, that's the opportunity that these wonderful headsets give you, is you can look straight inside your brain and say, oh, well, actually, this is what it does for me. It doesn't matter what somebody else does. These little friends can actually bring us, so much happiness through understanding rather than comparison. Through
understanding our own inner states. And so, if you have one of these devices, so do different practices and notice the difference. in your own brainwaves. So when you do a one-pointed focus practice, or a deep relaxing breathing practice, or an open-hearted compassion practice, or an awareness of awareness itself practice, how did those look different in your graphs? And when you put them, you can sequence them one after the other in a practice session and notice the subtle changes. Notice when you're really absorbed in doing this versus really absorbed in doing this, how does it show up differently? And then you can use that to fine tune the practice. And that's where Stephen and I both found these really helpful and fun to use. So you have that spirit of curiosity and wonder and awe and exploration as you use these devices, rather than trying to get a result. And you learn so much more, and it'll be a lot of fun.
Beautiful, Kevin. Thank you. It's always such a joy to do these with you. And I hope everybody listening has, gained a little deeper extra insight into the wonders of their own being. So thank you, Kevin, always.
Thank you, Stephen. And thank you all for watching. Enjoy your practice.